Welcome, everybody, to the Sanctum podcast. My name is Citizen Strife, and this week is going to be kind of a re-review or refresh of something that I talked about quite a long time ago, and I actually beat quite a long time ago on my old channel. It was the second game I ever completed, and it's one that I've played so many times. I have kind of an innate feel for it, and that's Breath of Fire 3. And this one's going to be more of a freeform discussion rather than just kind of reviewing things bit by bit. I will try to keep things straight as I can, obviously, while I'm talking. But for me, whenever I think about this game, I always think it's my favorite Breath of Fire game. And not for any particular reason. It just ends up being good at almost everything. Nothing spectacular. Maybe a minigame here or there. Fishing. The fishing minigame is cathartic and fun. But when I look back at it, and every time I think about it, whenever I'm discussing it, none of the characters are outright bad, except maybe Nina 3, but that's more because she annoys me rather than being bad. But at the same time, there's like one or two that really transcend the game, and then there's like one or two that exist just to exist. Some of the minigames are terrible. Shisu. Some of the timed minigames. Some of the weird rhythm games, like that stupid vinegar game, they don't work the way they're supposed to. Or guiding the fucking anglerfish down the trail and getting the line hooked or whatever. Or misplacing parts or whatever. Or, and again, anything timed. Anything timed really sucks. But Then I remember the fishing minigame, the fairy village, which is intricate enough and has some cool stuff to it. Has some RNG, but is interesting in its own way. And then the battles. There's a lot of stuff you can do in the battles, but the speed is good, and then it's also bad. But you get what I'm saying. Like, there's a balancing act for everything, and it always ends up kind of on the side of good and above average at the end of the day, which is why I'm calling this the story of above average. Because no one single part, I do think there are memorable parts to the game, sure, but nothing outside of the fishing minigame is going to be so amazing that I can just snap it right off the top of my head. The music, there's a couple of music pieces I like, and then there's a bunch that just exist. But I still remember them, and I remember them for the good reason. And that's kind of what I wanted to discuss, was the good tends to outweigh the bad, and that's why something like this always stands the test of time. Because I could wax poetic, and probably someday I will, about the Final Fantasy games, or a Dragon Quest game that did things really well, like Dragon Quest 11, which I've talked about, or a Persona game that does so much stuff well, right? I could do that, but sometimes there's merit in talking about games that are bad, there's merits in talking about things that frustrate you, there's merits in games that are like comfort food, and this feels like comfort food, and that's what's important, I think. So getting started in that, I would say the story. In terms of the story, it doesn't really get going for a little bit, and the scope of it doesn't really hit home for quite a while, but it does hinge on an interesting early hook that goes into another one, falls down a little, but then picks back up when it needs to. It follows enough of a progression that by the time you get to it, you know what you need. So really, the strong hook of the early part of the game is this silent protagonist, Ryu, joining this couple of bandits as a family and kind of going through the weird struggles for a couple of missions and doing, odd stuff, both good and bad, and kind of learning the lessons of you're doing good, and then, oh no, you used hubris and were tricked and really screwed up and got caught by the mob, and that was not good. And I liked how the game phrased both instances. They were the talk of the town and the happy boys who were able to, help a village, and then they realized that they weren't as great as they thought, and then it was like, why did you steal money from guys who know the mob, and then these mobsters come in and beat the shit out of them, and then you realize that the weird happy family of bandit kids that you were got a dose of reality. And I think this is something that the game does do, is show off the realities of consequences, because you have a child storyline and you have an adult storyline, and you do have these competing, like, innocence but also like some dark stuff going on while you're being chased by the mobsters, and then you deal with this big giant dude who ends up kind of being the cornerstone of the story, and I'll get to that with the plot, but you have enough of a hook where you're trying to find your friends, but you're stuck with this mob bullshit. And even though, like, Nina and Momo aren't, like, the strongest characters, they do enough because they're kind of driving Ryu towards finding people, out of the goodness of their hearts, and you're joining them and they're trying to help you and all that. And then, Peiko joins, whatever, that's great. But then Gar joins by beating the absolute fuck out of the mobsters, like you do. But by the time the mobster storyline goes, you get to the next leg, which is Gar taking you to see God, but he's not actually taking you to see God. He's actually trying to kill you, right? And knowing that was leading up to it, because you didn't really know. And the game kind of does weird, silly shit on the side here and there. But the Gar storyline is where things really pick up, because you get this filling in of what Ryu is. You already kind of knew that he was a dragon, and you've been fucking around with the dragon splicing. And again, I'll get to that in the combat. But by the time you get to the Gar storyline, you're at your, like, third major storyline. And then you realize, oh, you're doing a time skip. Gar's storyline keeps going, and he's taking you to see God for a different reason, because he's unsure of himself. He's unsure of what he was doing was right. And then you realize that Ray is alive, so you think Tipo is alive, but then he shows up way later in one of the most effective scenes in the game. And then it builds. It builds. It builds. And you're chasing God. You're meeting Dace, who's awesome, because she was awesome in every other game she's been in. And by the time you get to Dragnir, everything makes sense. So you're finding God, and you're figuring out what's going on with the other side of the world and why it's so hard to cross it. So there's this sense that even if you're doing little side things to keep progressing the main plot, you're always moving. Like every couple of hours or every few hours to the next major bit. It's like 5 to 7 hours for each major story bit, and you're getting you're getting caught up in it. And by the time you learn who the main boss is, because you don't really know who the main villain is. And the biggest thing I realized with this plot is that Miria is not trying to be malevolent, but she's not trying to be a trickster either. She's more just afraid. and misguided. And this was something that I'm pretty sure I brought up in the first video. It was an effective subversion of what they did in the first game, because in the first game you just had this trickster god and they did the thing and they're gonna kill you, and that's that, because there was not much depth involved. But the game, specifically in the second half, focuses on different people getting the powers of God and doing with it what they want to do. This scientist trying to bring his mother back to life in any means possible. This dude who says, I'm a mobster and I'm going to use the power as we see fit because I can. You've got Ray trying to use what his gifts have been given to take vengeance on them, right? So you have the vengeance storyline, which is also very amazing. And you piece together, at least in Gar and Ray's cases, why they belong. And then Miria shows up and says, I'm afraid of you. I'm afraid of all of you crossing this impenetrable barrier, because I've basically put people on one side of the world behind this giant fuck-off ocean or sea, away from this factory, away from this killing desert that basically destroyed what was her home at the time. And I don't think Miria is ever considered immortal, but she's portrayed as such. She's what's known as a fury, and that's like a giant snake lady with wings and shit, and essentially like a naga, but she ends up just realizing too late that, and this goes into a lot of like Japanese RPG storylines where these people are fighting against God to not be caged in their cage and whatever. But Miria goes about it in a non-malevolent way. Like, she wants to just keep this person she thinks is this gigantic threat in a cage and then put everybody back on the safe side of the world, because, okay, we don't want guns, we don't want violence, we don't want endless technology destroying everything, we don't want dragons blowing shit up because they can. So the idea of checks and balances works in this situation. I do like that there is some shred of decency in her motivations, even if it is misguided. And, she never comes across as villain-like, just to be a villain. She is reasonable. She spends a lot of time talking to you as a party. And the final showdown just kind of goes over like the evils of the world and why she would do a thing. And that's like the biggest benefit of the plot. So even if you have like dips here and there in the story, the plot line always seems like it's moving forward. And there are amazing parts about it. Some of the characters and their motivations, and I'll get back to the characters in a minute, just some of them do not work. Though you do kind of wish that they would, but some of them exist just to exist and fill out the party. But at the end of the day, you're always leading to something. You're given a break here and there, but it never feels like you're losing track. Except when it comes to some mini-games and some other things, which is why it's not perfect. Like, why am I stuck in this stupid area helping this bookkeeper guy fall in love with this lady just to do a minigame? Why am I going through a volcano just to go through a volcano? Why am I going through 2 or 3 small dungeons rather than just going across the world? Like, the world hopping aspect is nice, but some of the areas don't really need to exist. Doing the lighthouse thing, doing the fairy village thing, they exist to exist. They build the world, but they also kind of don't. And, for its benefits, there are just like long stretches where stuff doesn't happen. And, helping a dork in a sea village eat fish again, it's just dumb. So that goes into the next thing, the mini games, where I liked being able to go fishing and just stop what I'm doing, but also being like, if I really, 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 really want to get the good stuff and overpower my characters and over level, get them the best equipment, I can do that. If I just want to play fishing, just to play fishing, like, it's an easy game to pick up. You just flop the stick, do it, and keep the bar in the middle, and keep the fish in the middle, and then watch them float, blip, 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 because fishing minigames should not be hard. I also like that it's a hold the button instead of the button mash, which certain games don't do. I like Ys, but Ys 8 did a button mash, and I didn't like it, especially for the harder ones, and it was really frustrating. At least with this, it's just hold the button and then take it off when dude's not on the range, But there's like 40 or 50 different fish you can catch, and they all do different things, and they also help in battle, so they can heal you, or they can do statuses. There's a lot of reasons to do the fishing minigame, but then you have collect this shit for the dude, and, collect the shishu, and, go get 4 different things, and make sure it's right, otherwise you get the shitty item. I've never gotten the best item from that minigame, by the way. Doing a lot of stuff for the fairy village does take time, and sometimes the randomness doesn't work, and I've never collected everything, and I don't want to get, stats and, copy stuff. I like just having it as a cheap in, or having a music test thing, but it's there. It's fine, but I don't think minigames are great, and any minigame involving the ship was a bit frustrating, because that one would always move, and you have to line it up and then zoom, but you can't zoom too fast because it'll overheat, and it overheats way quicker than you think it does, and then it works that. Then you have another one that's like a crane game right after that, or oh god, what's the other one of the black ship? Oh fuck, it's the one where you're counting your steps as you're trying to talk to Momo about a security system to turn the thing back on. And you're supposed to count to 100 in your head, and you're supposed to hear beeps and beeps and boops, and then it stops, and then you hear the beeps again, and it's just fuck, So Black Ship is just bullshit, and so for all the good, again, there's stuff that's kind of bad. And speaking of good and bad, let's talk about the characters. And I mean, I've talked about the characters before at length, but let's just run down the board. Ryu is a silent protagonist. He gets all the heavy lifting, but he himself has no personality. He's just Link, or Surge, or Chrono, or Adol. Doesn't matter. I don't care. Silent protagonists suck. I've never felt otherwise, and I'm never going to be convinced that they're good. So, whatever. Nina, fuck. I get what they're going for, but they give her the short end of the stick. She sort of likes Ryu, sort of doesn't. So they don't really do a romance storyline. They kind of hint at it, but they also kind of don't. And when you contrast it to Nina 2, who is the downtrodden, mythic, cursed figure who kind of gets shit on from the start of the game, and Nina 4, who is looking for her sister, and that's kind of the guiding force of everything that isn't Ryu-related, she gets a lot to work with. Nina 3 doesn't. Nina 1 and Nina 5 neither do much. So Nina 3 is kind of left as this snooty but happy, well-off princess girl who doesn't really get to do her own thing. And she basically gets one story bit midway through the game where she's like, I'm not a princess, I'm Nina first, and then I'm going to join this merry band of people and do their thing. But then she's also the person who roped us into doing the Bade storyline, and I fucking hate it. Because, fuck you, I hated that. It's a cool idea in theory, but in practice, it sucks. Because you have to, guide this guy through mock battles so he gets stronger. but he's a weakling and a dork, and it might take you 4 or 5 days, and you don't really know the stat base is like what. Like, I've never calculated the exact stats of like what Zig can do versus what Bade can do, so I just kind of have to wing it and hope I don't die. And what's worse is he doesn't get controlled, so you can only help him so much. And it's all for service for a storyline where you're just wandering into a lighthouse, and then you find out that the lighthouse doesn't actually lead to anything anyway, except it shows you the fairies. So you go somewhere else. So you realize you wasted like 2 hours of your time going through a bunch of crap to level up, to do a bunch of other shit, to gain a side quest, which is good, but going through 2 or 3 dungeons, which is bad, rather than just going to Angel Tower and keeping along with the Gar storyline. So Nina just, And then Nina frustrates me in battle because she has no magic power, like she has no strength, no physical strength, and it's like all she gets to do is mop up random encounters because her best spells are all AoEs, but magic power is decidedly worse in this game than physical skills. And I'm not talking just normal attacks, I'm talking physical based skills that are just plain better. So Nina kind of ends up like Naoto in the original Persona 4, where it's like, okay, she can mop the shit out of random encounters, but she's not useful in a fight against a boss, because her instant death shit's not going to work. So they had to change her around, right? But yeah, so Nina gets the short end of the stick, and it doesn't help that Momo can physically hurt dudes with a fucking bazooka and do healing and do spells. So Nina is useless in pretty much everything that Momo can do better. Momo's storyline's not great because she's just there to learn about technology, and that's about it. She doesn't get anything. Peiko doesn't get anything until the final scene because he's just there. And, he's an interesting character in battle because he can defend, but also counter, but also build. Like, you can have him defend, but then do counterattacks to do a shit ton of damage and just put him in the front row. Or he has some weird support skills that can mess up enemy encounters if you want to build them that way. But really, the story hinges on Gar and Ray, because Ray has pent-up anger up the ass for fucking up his childhood and his teenage years and screwing over Tipo and Ryu by kind of letting them go along with it. Tipo mostly did all the bad shit because he just went along with it, but Ray was the leader of the group. He was the older one, and he couldn't protect them from Baleo and Sunder. His motivation was, I'm going to find and kill anyone involved in the crime syndicate. So this game has dark moments, and very dark moments. He goes in to Sin City and fucking murders people. I don't exactly know why. Like, as soon as you leave the area and you come back, it's bright as rain and everybody's back to normal. That felt kind of awkward. But just the scene of him having gone through and murdered the shit out of dudes, and then bloodying up the boss before we bloody him up some more and kill him, only for him to find out that the people that did the damage were killed by Ryu and Gar already. So, and the game throws that to you. He basically said, like, Mikba basically says, you're looking for the people who I ordered to kill you. And, turns out they were already dead long ago. So how do you feel chasing ghosts? So Ray goes along with it, and then Gar, is kind of the linchpin of this god situation. He's torn between this, I'm been given this god-given right to kill dragons, but I'm questioning it because I'm that way. And, he's a stout, devout follower, but then he questions it, and his storyline and his transformation, that really holds the weight of the game on its shoulders. Other than, oh, Ryu's going to see Miria and finding Rei and all that, finding Tipo. I mean, it's cool to find Tipo again in the midst of the final dungeon and all, but again, Ryu only matters so much. Tipo matters more to Rei than it does to Ryu, I think, because there's only so much that Ryu can do to react to everything, and then Tipo just brushes Rei aside, only to not brush him aside and basically say, I just wanted to be with my family. I didn't want any of this. You know, and again, it's very sad, effective moments. You know, the characters do really intense things in spots when it counts. And even though the dialogue on the whole leans a little on the kooky and not really effective side, very basic side, it does enough. You know, it tries to be funny, but it's not trying to be snappy. It's hard to describe. It's very matter of fact. Their idea of humor is not very humorous, but because it's so matter of fact, it doesn't try so hard to be funny or be serious, or it just exists unto itself, and it never feels like it's a burden to do. I think the same goes for the combat. And the combat is where things shine. And this is where the dragon gene splicing and the master system, I kind of want to talk over all of these because that's where the meat of the game is. I do hate that it's random encounters. It sucks so bad that we're getting towards like early 2000s where enemies are on the field, or we can toggle that. Like, we've gotten more used to toggling encounters on and off with like remasters and things like that. But even back then in the mid 90s, you know, it wasn't ubiquitous. You know, some Final Fantasy games had encounter none, some of them didn't. And Breath of Fire 3 didn't. So you were kind of stuck doing random encounters, and most of the time the fights weren't bad. There were some hard enemies here and there, but by and large they were easy enough. But the crux of the system is you have your skill sets, you have your physical damage, you have your magic, but what really set this apart was the ability to take enemy skills, or to take a master skill. And say you take an enemy skill, they attack you, and you learn it. Much like you would the enemy skill materia or blue magic in Final Fantasy. And it ranges from really silly, banal things to really strong physical attacks to AoE magic spells to really cool stuff. There's so much versatility and weird things you can and can't do, and it helps to really kind of bridge the gap between how do you want to build a character to accentuate their strengths even more, or give them like a well-rounded sort of vibe. So, you know, you can keep a character the way you want, or you can always change it up. Like, if you like the game enough, you're not sunk playing the same. You know, you have to have 3 people, and most often you have to have Ryu. So at most, if you want to have different characters, you need to mix and match, and you can mix and match the characters how you see fit. I almost never use Nina, but I did on occasion, just to find out the magic didn't work. But, you know, maybe I think I mostly used Momo and Gar, but sometimes I wanted to use Rei and Momo, or use Peiko here and there if I just wanted to have him just defend, you know. And that speaks to the master system, because not only do you get enemy skills, but you get the masters. And the masters, you can find them by giving them an item. You can find them by just doing nothing. Like, there's a guy who literally does nothing for you, but he opens up another one. There's a guy who gets you some skills if you give him some items again. You find this lady's jewel for him. You do the fishing minigame, you get the other guy, and you kind of learn to mix and match things. And you can just dump somebody in, like, if you just want a physical attacker, you just have Ryu on Bunyan the whole game, or Gar on Bunyan the whole game, and done. You can put the bartender Fall for somebody instead if you don't want the agility, but you just want them to tank damage, which is good for Peiko, or you have magic-based masters like Dace or Ladon who really help Nina, but you can also get stuff like Aura, which is like the best stuff in the game. So, everybody has different stats. And if you're really crazy about min-maxing, you can mix and match masters every single level that messes up their master growth, the spells you learn. But you could do that. You could tie somebody to a master for 4 or 5 levels and then dump them. You could, like I said, keep them as a certain master. Or I think in my last playthrough, I just randomized it. I was like, you go there, you go there, you go there, you go there, And then, add on all of that, you have the dragon gene splicing. So Ryu gets like 20, I think it's 18 or 24. I'm going to say it's 18 different genes throughout the game. Some are better than others. Some are elemental based. Some are, pure physical. Some are defensive. Some change based on who's in your party. Like you can fuse different ones. Like you can see where, like, mentally it's exhausting trying to remember all of the things you could do. Like, yeah, you have the memory system, but by and large, like, you have versatility to do almost anything in this game. You don't have to stick with just the most powerful ones. You could find that you just want a guy to use Aura. You could find you just want a guy to use better physical attack. You could find a guy to use instant death stuff. Ryu is allowed to mix and match with so many different things. And when you tack on the master system, the enemies, the examine system, the enemy skills that you learn, different party members with their different strengths and weaknesses, and then the dragon splicing, you're just like, oh my god, there's so much you can do to change up a playthrough. Not as much as, say, Final Fantasy V. I think that's a nice, easy, snappy method. This is a little more obtuse at times, and it doesn't really show up until you've gained a few levels or gained some different skills. So it's a more obtuse way of doing kind of a job system, but it's essentially doing different jobs or different builds. You can build different characters in different ways. You're not kind of sunk doing one build for one guy. If you wanted to, you could build them the exact opposite way of their build. I forget if I've ever tried that. It's probably not the most advisable, taking Gar and turning him into a mage or other stupid shit like that, But maybe I want to play on opposite day. I haven't played that game in forever, but if I ever did, it'd be nice to fiddle with it. Stuff like that. Last thing I'll mention is music. Some of the music I do remember more fondly than others. I would say the songs I like the most, if anybody wants to look those up, like a soundtrack, would be Fighting Man from the Tournament of the Contest of Champions. You fight Gar for the first time, and he just has this like cool like Coliseum kind of thing. Just this heavy like intro stuff. It builds up, and then you get the main part, and then you get like a cool breakdown bit, and then it goes right back to the heavy part. I liked the Dawn of Mine, which is a weird choice, but mainly because it's this weird, haunting kind of like solitude, solemn. It's weird to describe. It's very bassy, but then it opens up and it has this like kind of haunting guitar work in there, which is neat. Windia is interesting, if only because it represents a very playful, happy place, very safe and secure, because some towns in the game are not so nice, not so lovable. Some of them are even like very dingy and dark and crap. But Windia was also good in just, you need a nice place, because sometimes you need that kind of song, like a Dolly or a Daguerreo, from Final Fantasy 9, or name name any of the town themes from Final Fantasy history that are just like nice, subdued, happy places that do a lot of stuff, and the song isn't trying to overwhelm you. It's just good to be in Windia without like being the best song, I think. For the Dragons, which is the song in Dragnir, which should be a great song because it's right near the tail end of the game where you learn who the main villain finally is, and you learn about Ryu's complete history and lineage, which kind of dates back to Breath of Fire 1 more so than Breath of Fire 2. But For the Dragons and Dragnir is a great town theme. It gets you kind of going. The boss theme in there is cool. I think it's called Donden. So I don't mind the normal boss theme, but I think Fighting Man and Donden are both more unique and interesting. I don't like Miria Station all that much, but I like the final boss theme. The final boss theme is intense. I believe it's called Self-Determination or Free Will or whatever. It's the fight against Miria. The battle with Miria is fantastic. You get this like really rushing theme at first, and you get this haunting like organ or piano noise to break down the part. And you get back to the heavy. It kind of, not exactly, but to a, like it's a non like guitar focused version of, say, Poem for Everyone's Souls, like from Persona 3. It's like the haunting parts of that song, right, played in a more traditional medieval, or orchestral kind of vibe to it. The ending theme is fine. I can't say I love it, but I do like it. And it's very happy-go-lucky and whatnot, but it's not in the same vein as like I Am the Wind, right? Because that's very subdued and almost like it's very subdued and almost ballad-like. This is more, hey, you beat the game, do 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 do. It's kind of like an anime ending theme or something, You did the thing, you beat the thing. Yeah, the world might be fucked, but here's a cool, happy-go-lucky song for you. So, 5 or so songs that I remember of being like, oh my god, I go back to this all the time. And it helps that if you want to, you can do the Fairy Village minigame and listen to them all you want, except for, I'd say, the final, like everything until the final boss, I think. You can listen to every song within reason. I remember most every song being on that list, but by and large, the OST, I go back to it every once in a while, and I listen to a lot of them, and I like it. It's not going to win any awards, but again, neither is this game. But I did want to gush about different things about it because there's so much to enjoy. There's so much to get wrapped up in for a 30 to 40 hour adventure. Again, not too long, not too boring, because I'm dealing with this with Dragon Quest VII. I'm playing that right now, and I would have beaten this game, Breath of Fire 3, and I'm only about 2/3 of the way through Dragon Quest VII, and I'm almost getting exhausted. Not by choice. I would have beaten Breath of Fire by now. Right? So it was kind of in that happy medium of that PlayStation era where you got like a good 30 to 40 hour video game without it delving deeper into the 50, 60, 70, 80, or God forbid, the 100-hour stuff that we sometimes get now. Like, I love you, Persona 5, but you're 100 fucking hours. I don't need that in every game I play. So, hooray. But, I want to say the only way to really play this game is to have it in the PS1, or I played it on a PS3, which says a lot. When I still had the PS3, that was the last time I had access to it. I want to say they do have access to it on like Steam or GOG, but this is a franchise I wish was re-released and remastered, because specifically 3 and 4, having replayed 2 recently, no. Like, that final dungeon, god, fuck no. If you think random encounters suck in 3, random encounters suck so bad in 2. And it's bad. The final dungeon in 2 is just like 10 floors, then a town, then another 10 floors, and then you fight 2 or 3 bosses, and it's just like, fuck, it's exhausting. It's not as bad as OG Final Tower, but anyway, this is about Breath of Fire 3. The final dungeon in 3 is decent. You know, takes a couple of hours to do, but at least it has like 3 or 4 different set pieces, so it learned not to just be a big frickin' slog, you know. But again, if nothing else, like Breath of Fire 3, and to an extent, though not my favorite, Breath of Fire 4, are what people think of when they think of Breath of Fire games. The ones that they want brought back are probably Breath of Fire 3 and Breath of Fire 4. If you have access to those games somehow, or if you've bought them, or God forbid you still have an old school PlayStation, play it. If you have access to it online, play it. I would not regret playing Breath of Fire 3 again. I don't need to play it right now because I have so many other games on my channel, but I don't regret having played it at all as early as I did, because I've beaten that game about 10 times in my life, and I've always come back to it and enjoyed it, and there's so much to enjoy. So hopefully I've gushed about it, and, you know, maybe if you've never even heard of this game, maybe it'll give you something to look into. But that'll do for today. And hopefully I didn't trail off too long in one subject or another, because I still think this is fun, you know, but I don't want to overstate or oversell anything as good or bad unless I absolutely do despise something, which I normally don't. I normally do not despise a game, but if I'm gushing about a game, there's a reason I'm gushing about it. Don't mind the noise of the computer here for a second. Anyway, this was Breath of Fire 3's story of above average. Next anime review is going to be In the Clear Moonlit Dusk, one of my favorite shows of last season. Castlevania Lament of Innocence and Curse of Darkness, the PS2 Castlevania games. No Guns Life, and Danganronpa Goodbye Despair, which I'm close to finishing. I'm kind of midway through chapter 5, so I'm going to beat it definitely by the time. Probably beat it by the end of this month, or more likely into July. But hey, maybe by the time I get to that, I'll have access to 2x2 or 2x2. I still don't know when 2x2 comes out, so that's where that's going to feel weird. But if I have to review 2x2, I'll review 2x2 on its own. But for now, I will call it here for this episode, and I will see you next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.